Well, some interesting times we're living in, my brother.
Yes, man. I hear you. This is yeah, a very wild few days. So so let's just start there if you don't mind. Um, just I think a lot of people are trying to wrap their heads around everything that's happening. Not that we don't understand the outrage, but why do you think it's kind of hit the boiling point that it has right now?
Well, mainly because of the graphic nature of the video. When you look at the civil rights movement, the people that were standing on the side demanding civil rights in the 1960s had justice on their side. They were standing on the right side of the moral right side. In the same way that the people who have been decrying police brutality, an unjust judicial system, um, that there has not been fair treatment based on race, even based on class. They've been very clear that the system is against them, not working for them. But words can be easily dismissed, and what truly separated this moment in history is the graphic nature of the video and the impotence of the people on the sideline to be able to do anything about it to prevent this man from being killed. In the civil rights, it was when Bull Connor down there in Birmingham, Alabama, decided to turn the fire hoses and sig the dogs on the children who were protesting. And that was televised nationally across our country. So there were a lot of people that heard about the civil rights movement. They were sympathetic to the civil rights movement, but they did not see and kind of be able to vicariously experience the level of depravity of the racial bigotry until they saw the fire hoses and the dogs in Birmingham and other places like that. And it was the same here. The people have been saying in the Black community for decades, longer, listen, police are using excessive force. Um, I'm nervous every time a cop pulls me over. Situations escalate so quickly, so easily. There's beatings and imprisonments, and I don't know. You can go back to Sandra Bland, who was incarcerated and then found dead in her jail cell, and no one really knows what happens. Like there's all of these understandable stories of people that are fearful of the very people that are called to serve and protect. And this was a mainstream example of everything that has gone wrong with our system. And because it was a 10-minute video with people on the sidelines saying all the right things to speak a moral consciousness into this police officer, and yet they were not able to save this man's life unless they themselves did something violent. I think all of us put ourselves into the shoes of the people on the sidelines saying, what would we do in that given situation? And we have unbelievable sympathy now. And we realize we're our consciousness, we're awakened to the fact that, this is a systemic problem. This is not one rogue cop. You have four police officers that are complicit in the death of this man. And we saw it in Chicago with the shooting 16 times of Laquan McDonald. And not only was he killed by being shot 16 times by an officer who arrived on the scene 4 seconds earlier, then there was a cover-up, a police cover-up, and a lack of accountability. And the video, they tried to hide the video. And then a year later, when the video finally was released to the public, there were outcries and national protests against that death as well. So what we're realizing is that it's more frequent than we think. it's more systemic than we think, and that it is imperative, and we're glad that the police now have the body cameras, but it's imperative that we ourselves as citizens help hold accountable those that have the badge. So thank God there was someone on the sideline that was videoing the incident, or we might still not be aware on a national scale of what the police brutality ultimately is for the Black community.
So, for those who are not aware of how Chicago is set up, it has, I don't even know exactly how many, but dozens of neighborhoods similar to like New York City has boroughs.
Right.
And and you're in the North Lawndale community of Chicago on the west side, which is actually where the Laquan McDonald shooting took place. So since a lot of what you've seen is in North Lawndale, can you first tell us why North Lawndale? Why is that an important place in Chicago history and just sort of in this moment in history?
Hmm. Well, you're right. Chicago is made up of 77 different neighborhoods that each have their own culture and autonomy, and we actually look at that as a strength of the city. You know, we don't want to become, we want to be unified, but we don't want to have uniformity where we're all one monolithic culture. You know, we love the fact that neighborhoods are cultural pockets. And in North Lawndale, we were Bohemian Jewish. We were known as the creme de la creme, the gray stones and the brownstones. The architecture is beautiful, and it was a Jewish community. It was probably an upper class or an upper middle class community. And when the Great Migration took place in the 1950s, and African Americans came north from the South seeking jobs, seeking better housing opportunities, seeking particularly manufacturing, and Chicago was a hub of a lot of those things. In fact, even today, 50% of all the trains that travel throughout the country go through Chicago. So it is a transportation hub. The world's busiest airport is in Chicago, or the country's busiest airport is in Chicago. So there's a lot of Chicago plays a very central hub for a lot of things that happen nationally. So African Americans wanted to take advantage of that and become part of this kind of new opportunity, financial opportunity for their families. So as they came north and they moved into communities, there was a racial backlash. And as the original doctors and lawyers and kind of those that were college educated and had jobs and strong vocational and careers moved into North Lawndale, the white folks did not want to live next to Black people. And so there was a redlining, there was contract buying, there was the real estate agents. Of course, they make their money when there's a lot of real estate transactions. And so they certainly put the word out that if you don't sell immediately and quickly, you're going to lose your property values and all those kinds of things like that. And we saw from basically 1950 to 1960, there was almost a 100% transition in the ethnic background of North Lawndale. And it went from all white to all Black. And the reason that's important was because when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in 1968, there were huge riots across the country, particularly in urban centers. And in Chicago, one of the urban centers that blew up in riot and protest following his assassination was North Lawndale. And the buildings were, out of fury and out of anger, the buildings were looted, the buildings were burned. Part of the frustration of the people that were doing the violence in the community was the fact that these businesses were not owned by people from the community. They were owned, and the money soon left the community. Even in the housing market, most of the buildings were not owner occupied, they were renter occupied. And so people were economically disenfranchised. And then when King was killed, it was a 1-2 punch. Not only were they economically disenfranchised, but now they were politically and socially disenfranchised, and they exploded in rage. And since the riots in 1968, we've never been able to really rebuild our economic corridor in North Lawndale. So when there were protests and some violence and some looting following what recently happened this last week, it was devastating to us because what little progress we had made in our neighborhood since 1968 was quickly eroded. Other than the fact that we have relationships and we're left with those relationships, and through those relationships, we will rebuild. But it was devastating to see what little business that we did have being torn apart with the anger and frustration that took place following this video.
Now, one of the things that you told me that I had no clue, that you don't see this on the news, you don't really hear about it on the news, is that at least some of the early evidence that you have seen and have heard of in the community is that the first wave of rioting and looting seems to have come from outside of the community. Can you describe that?
Yeah, absolutely. Our family was involved in some initial protests that took place both in the community, and then we were involved with some protests that took place downtown on last Saturday. But because those protests turned violent, in other words, police cars were flipped over, some of them were set on fire, there were things being thrown at police officers. There were some stores downtown the windows were smashed out, and there was some looting that took place. One of the things that the Mayor Lightfoot did, and I have a lot of respect for Lori Lightfoot as our mayor, but one of the things she did was she shut down the downtown corridor. She blocked all um, entrance ramps, exit ramps, streets traveling to and from downtown, and you had to show that you lived in that downtown corridor or worked in that downtown corridor, even to be able to go into that. Well, we were having a huge number of people coming in from outside of Chicago that were part of the chaos, part that were instigators, and they've actually identified instigators on both sides of the equation. Instigators that are anarchists, that are trying to stir up trouble and trying to create chaos and disorder, and that's their intention to do so. And then we actually are aware of the white supremacists that came in as well and were part of the protests, and they were trying to stir up racial hatred and racial division and strife. And there were even police officers here in Chicago that were instigating, particularly gang members and things like that, to participate in a violent way. So there were people that were stirring the pot intentionally to take the protests that were about justice, Black Lives Matter, demanding police accountability, asking for less money to be put into policing and more into the social infrastructure of our communities. Those messages were lost if they could take it to more of a chaotic, violent, looting thing. So after downtown was closed, the people that were bent on doing this, and they were organized, they had 15 to 20 rented vehicles with darked out license plates. They began moving west, and some of them began moving south of the city, hitting neighborhood after neighborhood, starting in Pilsen, then moving to Bucktown, and then moving to Humboldt Park, and then moving to Lawndale. And you could actually track the wave of crime that was happening. These were people that were not from our neighborhood, and they would drive in mass. They would hit a strip mall. They would break out every window and every door. They would put as much stuff as they could in their car, and they would speed off. Those are not people from the community. Then the community would walk by the strip mall and see that the shoe store or the clothing store was completely vandalized, was completely broken into. And it was a perfect storm of opportunity. People are struggling because of the pandemic. They've lost wages, they've lost income, they're hurting financially. They've been locked away for 12 weeks. And so, in their mind, which is understandable to me, they were saying, I need shoes, my wife needs shoes, my kids need shoes. All these shoes are going to be taken anyway. So they were faced with that decision. Do I then go in and take shoes, take clothes, for my family? And while, on the surface, okay, it's wrong. Crime is wrong. Stealing is wrong. I do have sympathy and understanding for those that are at that place where they have to make that decision, and they decide to go ahead and be opportunists and seize that moment. But those are the community people that are hurting our local businesses by doing that. But once again, it would not have happened had it not been for the instigators coming from the outside, in the initial wave of disrespect and violence towards those businesses.
And I think a common question that might be asked, especially by those of us that aren't inside those communities, is why are those businesses not getting police protection from those instigators? Why are they fending for themselves?
Hmm. It's a good question. I mean, the level of protest was kind of unprecedented, and I think the police made a decision early on, which I can understand, which is we are not going to jeopardize our safety during this volatile time by standing between these thieves and these vigilantes, and property. We're going to try to do what we can to protect people. We're going to try to do what we can to protect residences, but it is not worth the risk to position ourselves between these people that are bent on stealing and a business that some people would say, well, hopefully they're insured, hopefully they have the opportunity to rebuild. And in the same way, I felt a little bit of that. I am a minister and a street worker and a advocate in our community. And of course, we did not want what happened in 1968 to happen in 2020. And so, we were gathering men who were going to be, guardians of the neighborhood. We were going to be the eyes and the ears going out into the community and kind of standing in front of and representing the fact that we want to defend our local businesses and places of worship and our schools and things like this. And we were heavily discouraged, mainly because there was no cooperation or coordination with the police to even ensure our own safety if we did something like that. We were totally taking that risk, knowing that we wouldn't even have the police to back us up if something did go horribly wrong. So we just had to take a position of we're going to see what happens and help those businesses rebuild after the fact.
So that leads really nicely to the next question, which is, for someone like me, for someone who's a white family in the suburbs, for the most part, not on a day-to-day basis, confronted with this kind of um, the protests, the marches, the rioting, yet with a heart of sympathy and a heart of empathy and a heart of compassion, how does the white community posture itself in a way that's helpful, in a way that's constructive, and in a way that doesn't get in the way of the progress that the Black community is making?
Excellent question. Because really the real work of the Black Lives Matter movement and people that are asking for an examination and a reevaluation of the judicial system and how we operate in America, it's a white problem. It is institutions that are steeped in white supremacy and white privilege, have become the social norms in our country. What does it mean to be American? Well, we think what it means to be American essentially is white culture. And I compare it to, I do a lot of gardening right now, and part of gardening is weeding. And we know how tenacious weeds can be and how the roots can dig very deep down and hold on with everything they got, right? It takes a lot of effort to pull some of those mature weeds out of the ground. And sometimes you have to actually get out a shovel and you have to break the ground around the weed to free it from its grip. And that's what we see in our country happening right now. The ground is being broken around some of those weeds that need to be uprooted. And as Christians, these are things, the uprooting of the weed is steeped in scripture. It's loving what is sincere, it's hating what is evil, it's clinging to what is good, it's being devoted to each other in love, where we honor one another above ourselves. And these are things that just roll off of our tongue as Christians, but it's things that, how do we apply that across race? How do we honor someone above ourselves? How do we not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good? And these are incredible challenges of our time. I would say the first step is we need to educate ourselves. We feel emotional empathy towards Black people being discriminated against. But do we really know the level to which they've been discriminated against? The number of years they've been discriminated against, the number of centuries, how America's original sin of what we did to the Native Americans and what we did to Africans to build the foundation of this country has morphed into so many other social and political messages, but still exist to this day. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to read things and educate ourselves about some uncomfortable subjects that we haven't really, entertained. And I would point you to books like Black Like Me, which is a book written by John Howard Griffin back in the 1950s, a white guy who was a journalist who decided that he was going to take some very risky medicine to actually turn his skin dark. And he was going to see how he was treated as a Black man in the South, even though he had the same level of education, the same level of expertise, the same level of upbringing. He was still writing the same articles, and he was going to document in the book Black Like Me how he was just treated differently based on one thing, the pigment of his skin. And it's very, very interesting. I would point you to Jim Wallace, a great Christian author who actually has a book called America's Original Sin. Brian Stevenson has done amazing work with Just Mercy and showing how serving as a defense lawyer representing people that have been given death sentences and have been unfairly prosecuted and where that has led him in his journey. And that's an amazing book. There's a book called White Fragility, which I would encourage every white person to read. It's all the reasons we don't want to talk about race, and it's all of our defenses when people start talking about race. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander just is an expose on the level of discrimination, policy discrimination that has led to much of why we're at where we're at today, including the levels of mass incarceration of African Americans in our country. So that's step number one, is to really educate ourselves, read books written by Black authors. And once you do that, I think what you'll find is that you want to lean in to Black relationships, because you educate yourselves on what the facts are, and then you immediately want to embrace the relational side of this struggle. And so what does it mean to, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry as we lean in towards African Americans or Black and brown issues, and suspend our judgment to really seek to understand before, we want to be understood.
That's good. That's good. So can you inform our audience a bit about YMEN, the Young Men's Educational Network, and what you and your organization are doing to be salt and light, even now, even this week.
Yeah, well, my wife and I, we moved into North Lawndale 28 years ago. We were recent college graduates, didn't know what the heck we were doing. And it was in our first year of moving into North Lawndale that we were drawn to some amazing African American relationships. One being an 8-year-old boy who I fell in love with, got to know very well. He was in a very rough situation. Long story short, we were able to adopt him and his two brothers. And so we began, even in the first couple of years of our ministry, with a blended family. So right away, issues relating to race were not only social or were not only political, but they were also very personal. And as things, as struggles for particularly African American young men, I think the fifth leading cause of death for African American young men is being killed by police. The fifth leading cause of death is being killed by police. So, you just realize the trauma of what it's like to grow up as an African American young man. And I'll tell you, there's been many times I've been scared as a white father about my 3 African American boys and what's going to happen when they get stopped and pulled over. So I'm teaching them, you put your hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. You never reach for anything inside of the car. I'm coaching them on how to do everything possible to just get out of the situation alive. So we have tremendous empathy for the traumatic nature of when you see a video like this. It's not just an isolated incident. It's bringing to the forefront, hundreds of years of racial frustration and marginalization. So for YMEN, we've been working with emerging leaders, young people. These are young people from the sixth grade on up, so through middle school, through high school, through college. And these are amazing young men and young women that have a desire to honor God with their lives, to develop a love for learning and to access the highest levels of education that they can. Many of them are the first ones to go to college. And then also be part of the solutions in our community. They have gifts and abilities. So using those gifts and abilities to make our community a more beautiful place, a safer place, a place where people want to return, not a place where people want to leave from. And so we've been doing this now we're going on our 25th year. And it's been great to see our oldest students are now in their mid-30s, and many of them have come back to reinvest in the community, to work with our organization. So YMEN, which started out really as a vision of myself, has become a team-led effort where I happen to be the cream in the coffee, but the idea is that it's now indigenously led. These are young people from the community who are now the primary mentors, mentoring and investing in the next generation. So as trouble and struggle and difficulty takes place in the community, YMEN wants to position itself to be a lighthouse, to be a resource, to be a place where during the pandemic, we can distribute essential supplies and we can distribute needed food. We can cook meals for those that are sick or those that are shut in or the elderly. And as schools were having to move to an e-learning format to make sure that every one of our students had a computer, had access to Wi-Fi. There were so many that didn't even have those basics. So while they couldn't go to school, they also couldn't really engage in learning at home without some of those things. So our organization is to stand in the gap and to see what the needs are and to be a resource to the families and the kids of our community. So we stand with our young people on Saturday when they led a protest in our community. As staff, we got out there and we supported them and we stood by them. But as we're also knowing that police are also a part of the fabric of our community, we're working to build better relationships that exist between the community and District 10 police officers. So incidences like this are where your relationship gets stress tested. So we don't know necessarily what is going to come out of all of this. But we do know, that the people in Minnesota are hearing us because number one, they understand that they're not alone, that we stand in solidarity with them. Number two, the charges for the officer have been escalated from third degree to second degree. The three other officers that were standing there have now also been charged. So there is accountability that's taking place. People know this is not going to be swept under the carpet. This is something that the country is taking seriously. So what I hope comes out of this is that we emerge as a people that have a stronger voice, as a people who are equipped and empowered to make reasonable demands. I'm hoping that as the city of Chicago goes, we reduce the level of funding for policing and increase the level of funding for social service programming and for health related services, so that we can really begin to build the resources for what people need the most. It's not to lock people up; it's to provide the mental health services, the other services that have shown that during times of pandemic, African Americans are dying at a 7 times higher rate than white people are because of all the compounding issues. So let's learn from this, and let's move forward in a way where we begin to more systemically address those issues.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so my final little curveball for you is we're definitely going to be playing some music during our podcast, during this show, and I don't know if anything comes to mind. Obviously, we're going to be playing featuring African American artists, but does a particular artist or song come to mind that you think is a poignant soundtrack for us this week?
Well, I love Tamala Mann, "Take Me to the King."
Hmm.
I tend to listen to music like Fernando Ortega
Right.
because I think that as he sings and he plays, what I need more in my life is just the calm and the peace that
Hmm.
come from returning back to the basics of faith. The situations are so complex that the way forward is actually returning to the very core of what our faith means, to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves.
Hmm.
The solutions are simple and they're not easy, but they're steeped in relationship. So for me, I love my kids love NF,
Right.
so they love them some NF. But for me, I'm a little bit more into the Fernando Ortega, Rich Mullins, Tamala Mann. I love some good soul music as well. But you're the expert on music, so I would defer to you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, brother. Thank you for being on the show too.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's great. All right.